Hey everyone, it's Selwen here, today talking about the Frost Mage, and let's get straight into this RNG shit show of a spec, shall we? So Frost Mage is all about random procs, Fingers of Frost and Brain Freeze, affecting two of your most powerful abilities, Ice Lance and Flurry, and a little passive called Shatter. Those procs are gonna come from your main filler, Frostbolt, that deals pretty low damage but will have a chance to proc those two procs for 12% and 15% chance or so, respectively. So Fingers of Frost will affect your Ice Lances, that on itself deals very low damage, but if it's used against a frozen target, its damage triples. So Fingers of Frost will allow that Ice Lance to act as a target is frozen, and benefiting from the Shatter passive. Shatter gives you the ability for your spells to have a much higher chance to crit. Not a sure chance, but for simplification's sake, let's just say they will pretty much always crit. Brain Freeze works in a similar way, but to Flurry, but also removes its cast time, which on itself is quite long and makes it do 50% more damage. Plus, that same Flurry will apply a Shatter debuff on the target for 1 second, called Winter's Chill. Those two spells aren't worth using at all without those set procs or if the target isn't frozen, so take note of that. Besides that, there will be your water elemental pets dealing damage and having the water jets and freeze ability, also giving you Fingers of Frost procs, Frozen Orb, one of your main cooldowns traveling in a straight line until it hits an enemy, and as it deals damage, has a chance to also give you Fingers of Frost procs. Icy Veins, your other main cooldown, increasing your haste by 30% and increasing your overall frost damage by 20% or so. And your artifact ability is Ebon Bolt, dealing pretty good damage and gives you a Brain Freeze proc. Your main AoE is Blizzard on a small cast time, raining ice on your targets. And your other passive besides Shatter is your Mastery, called Icicles, appearing from your Frostbolts and are sent passively through your Ice Lances, but it also increases your water elemental pet damage. And with that then, let's talk talents. So there's two builds that you can use, or three rather, your single target one based on Thermal Void and your Glacial Spike build, which isn't as great, but I'll talk about it anyway. And of course your multi-target or Mythic plus build, which will stay largely the same except for one or two choices. So for the Thermal Void build, in the first tier, Lonely Winter is generally the go-to nowadays, removing your pet from the equation and allowing you to do more damage with your Frostbolts, Flurry, Ice Lances and Frozen Orb by 28%. Bone Shielding kinda works if you want to keep your pet for that small frost damage increase, but if you're any decently geared, you should go for Lonely Winter, plus it removes the micromanagement that you need to do with your pet, which can be annoying. On tier 2, Shimmer is usually the go-to for the extra charge of Blink and to allow you to cast and blink at the same time. Ice Flows is nice as it will allow you to actively cast and move when you activate it, but I generally recommend Shimmer. On the next tier, Incanter's Flow is usually the best to increase your overall damage by 4 to 20% on intervals, so we'll move up and down. Rune of Power is good, but since Frost is full of RNG, planning your Rune of Power can be difficult. Even though it can work, Incanter's Flow is usually your go-to. On the fourth tier, it will depend on the situation. If it's pure single target, Frozen Touch will be best by increasing the chance at getting Fingers of Frost by 40%. If there's any opportunity in the fight to hit a secondary target, however, Splitting Ice should be taken instead for your Ice Lances and Icicles to cleave, so hitting a secondary target, overtaking Frozen Touch in damage. You can even use it in extremes while there's only one phase in a boss fight to cleave while the rest is all single target, and still make Splitting Ice better if played correctly, so know what you are getting into to make up your decision. Next is whatever, mainly utility, so choose what you prefer or need. The go-to is usually Frigid Winds. Next for single targets is Unstable Magic for that extra Frostbolt damage. And last tier, obviously Thermal Void, making your Ice Lances increase the duration of Icy Veins by 1 second when active. If you play the Glacial Spike build, all will stay, you just want to take it. Gameplay wise, some things will change, and stats as well, but more on that later. Rune of Power might be good here to combo with it, but Incander's Flow still works perfectly fine. Power wise, Thermal Void usually gonna overtake it in any situation. Glacial Spike restricts your mobility highly, and in realistic scenarios might prove more difficult to pull off correctly, so I highly recommend you to go with Thermal Void. As for your Mythic Plus or multi-target build, all will stay as well except for Splitting Ice. You really want that for the cleave, and Arctic Gale for the extra blizzard damage, which is pretty self-explanatory. Comet Storm can be nice for AoE or Mythic Plus if you use it nicely, but the radius is quite small, so making it hit all nearby targets, such as trash packs, can be difficult, so take it at your own discretion. The other talents work perfectly fine for Mythic Plus as well. Glacial Spike if you want a little bit more burst, and it also benefits from Splitting Ice since it counts as an icicle from your mastery, so it will cleave hitting 2 targets, so it can be pretty good. Overall, Thermal Void continues to be the go-to. And with that done, let's move over to your rotation. First, let's just start with a simple rotation without cooldowns, and so no Icy Veins, Frozen Orb or Ebon Bolt. Then go by phases, and just to start by explaining how your procs work. So like I said previously, the main way you're gonna get procs is with Frostbolt. So the main idea with the Frost Mage and what you should always have in your minds is that you want to cast as many Frostbolts as you possibly can to maximize their proc generation, especially since it's so RNG based. And granted that you're not gonna overwrite procs with it. More on that in a bit. So how are you gonna utilize them? First, let's just use a Frostbolt, and you might or not get a proc. It's RNG, so you never know what you're gonna get, or even if you're gonna get any. So the idea after casting that Frostbolt would be to immediately cast another Frostbolt. Remember the rule to cast as many Frostbolts as you can. If you did get a proc from the previous Frostbolt, is now on this next one that you're gonna decide what to do with them. So if you got Fingers of Frost, you're not gonna stop that Frostbolt. No, let it cast, and at the end, send the Ice Lance. That's the basic rule for practically every single of Frost procs that you get, although there's an exception to that I'll talk later. But you always want to chain a Frostbolt Ice Lance, because this way, after sending those 2 spells, you might get another proc, so you just keep that going. Frostbolt, Ice Lance. Cancelling spells mid-cast is something that you want to try to avoid at all times, unless it's really life-threatening, so never do it because of your procs. Keep those Frostbolts rolling as much as you can. Now, those procs can get up to 3 charges. Even though the UI only shows you 2 little effects, you can get 3. But no matter if you have 2 or 1 or even 3, you always want to do Frostbolt, Ice Lance. Don't blow your load too early because that's not fun. Do that Frostbolt always before it, okay? Even if you're sitting at the 3 charges, which can happen especially when you're using Frozen Orb, that I'm gonna talk after, if you use the proc fast enough after that Frostbolt, you actually won't overwrite, as there's a tiny window between you sending the spell and the spell hitting to get a proc. Something to take of note later as well. Now, besides Fingers of Frost, you're also gonna get Brain Freezes on there for your Flurry. It hits much harder than Ice Lance, but they're also more rare. And contrary to Fingers of Frost, they only stack 1 time, meaning they're gonna take priority over a Fingers of Frost proc, and you want to use them as fast as you can, because if you use a Frostbolt and you have a Brain Freeze and you don't use that Flurry and you decide to go for an Ice Lance instead, you might get another Brain Freeze proc, which is just gonna overwrite it, and you don't want that to happen, as then you're just losing procs and you're just gonna lose DPS in the end. Fingers of Frost have 3 charges, so it's safer to just leave them there to prioritize your Brain Freeze. So the way you want to use them is exactly in the same way as those Ice Lances, always doing a Frostbolt before. So if you do a Frostbolt and you get a Brain Freeze, you go for another Frostbolt and Flurry. Now, one thing unique to it is that it also applies a debuff called Winter's Chill, just for 1 second, meaning your spells will act as frozen, so they will benefit from that shatter passive. So not only is going to make the Frostbolt crits almost surely, but also meaning that always after that Frostbolt Flurry combo, you want to do an Ice Lance with it, even without Fingers of Frost, as it will work in the same way. So Frostbolt, Flurry, Ice Lance, as fast as you can and always. Now, like I said, Brain Freeze takes priority above Fingers of Frost, so even if you are in a situation where you have 1 or 2 Fingers of Frost procs and the Brain Freeze is up, you still want to do that Frostbolt, Flurry, Ice Lance. You're gonna lose the Fingers of Frost proc there to Winter's Chill and it's not gonna do anything, but it's better this way than using those Fingers of Frost first before the Brain Freeze. Other thing that I mentioned is your proc generation and your spell's travel time, or just the way Frost generates procs. So since you always want to do a Frostbolt, Flurry, Ice Lance, you might think, well, if I do that Frostbolt with a Brain Freeze active, am I not just overriding it like you said before? Actually, no. Like I said, with Fingers of Frost, there's a tiny window between you sending the Frostbolt and it actually hitting or generating a proc. So it's possible for you to send a Frostbolt with a Flurry and generate another Brain Freeze straight after. So as long as you use it right after that Frostbolt cast time, you're good. That's why it's so important to always chain a Frostbolt with all of your procs so you get more of them, alright? Now, last thing, it is possible for you to actually clean your Fingers of Frost procs before going for your Flurry without cancelling spells or overriding procs or anything like that, just so you don't waste that Fingers of Frost to Winter's Chill. So whenever the opportunity presents itself for you to do so, like for an example, you just did a Frostbolt, Ice Lance, and after doing those spells, you get a global cooldown, 1 second or less window where you can't click anything, right? So if in those moments you got, say, a Brain Freeze and a Fingers of Frost, what you can do is to first use the Ice Lance without a Frostbolt to clean them out, then go for a Frostbolt and then the Flurry, Ice Lance. This way, you get an extra Ice Lance on there. There's still a chance that you might get the Fingers of Frost on that same Frostbolt, which you're gonna lose after with the Ice Lance for the Winter's Chill, but nothing you can do about that. But again, that is just to take advantage of the global cooldown window. If you have no procs and you do a Frostbolt, and straight after that Frostbolt you're gonna do another, because you can't use anything else, and you got a Brain Freeze and the Fingers of Frost, you don't stop that Frostbolt. Go for that Flurry, Ice Lance anyway, alright? So speaking of which, what about when you have no procs? Well, that's when the fun starts for the Frost Mage. Just spam Frostbolt until the RNG gods bless you with some. Meanwhile, you can just think to yourself why you decided to roll Frost Mage to begin with and regret all of your life decisions. So enjoy. And that covers your proc management pretty much. There's two other micro managements that you can do. One is your chain reaction and artifact traits that after you're critting with a Frostbolt, you're gonna get a short duration buff that increases your Ice Lance damage, and it stacks 3 times. So it's more RNG in a way, but using those flurries with a Frostbolt, like I said before, is gonna proc that pretty much always, because you're gonna shatter it. So one thing you can do, although is not gonna increase your DPS by a crazy margin, but just some micromanagements, some extra that you can do, is to delay an Ice Lance. So let's just say you just have one proc and nothing else. You don't need to use it right away. Instead, you can hold on to it and keep casting Frostbolt to choose the best moment to use it. So it could be towards that chain reaction buff, or even your Incanter's Flow as well, since the damage increase goes up and down, so you can wait for the 5 stacks to then use that Ice Lance, or any other specific moments in a boss fight where you can cleave if you have the Splitting Ice talent, or just a priority moment where your damage is going to be higher. For those 2 last examples, it could present a really nice DPS increase depending on the encounter, such as Antor and High Commands. The ads are about to appear, so you're stacking up a couple of Fingers of Frost procs to then use the Ice Lance. But as for Chain Reaction or Incanter's Flow, it will improve as well, but is a really small increase. So unless you're really pushing, I wouldn't bother too much with it, okay? As for your Icicles, they just stay there, so nothing to worry about. They're just gonna be sent with your Ice Lances or with Frostbolt if you add 5. And if you're wondering about the double Ice Lancing, that's been dead for a while now, so Sorry. If you don't know what that was the ability to fit 2 ice lances during your winter's chill by using some latency shenanigans and using your blink to get close to shorten the travel time of your ice lance, then moving back. But again, rip. Now, that all said and done, what about those juicy cooldowns and your opener? So, how are you gonna fit Heaven Bolt, Icy Veins, and Frozen Orb? In a general sense, all those cooldowns are just gonna improve your proc generation. So when starting up a boss fight, what you want to do is pre-cast that Ebon Bolt. It takes quite a while to do so doing it as a pull timer is going down or guessing when the boss is gonna be pulled is how you're gonna firstly use Ebon Bolt. Ebon Bolt is also gonna generate a brain freeze for sure, meaning it will apply Winter's Chill and allow that Ebon Bolt to benefit from Shatter. So critting for a pretty big hit, and since there's a Winter's Chill on there, you want to follow with an Ice Lance like before. As for Icy Veins, you want to use in the middle of that, it's out of a global cooldown, so right when Ebon Bolt is about to be sent, you pop it, then that Flurry and the Ice Lance. Remember that you need to be fast on that Flurry for the Ebon Bolt to shatter, so if you don't feel comfortable clicking Flurry, Icy Veins and then Ice Lance quickly, you can use it afterwards, but you shouldn't have an issue. Then goes for your Frozen Orb. Your Frozen Orb has a pretty nice chance to give you Fingers of Frost procs, so just aim it properly. Now, you don't want to just blindly start using your procs, remember the previous rules, so go for a Frostbolt and Ice Lance. Then just repeat. If you get a Brain Freeze, do the same as before, Frostbolt, Flurry, Ice Lance, and adapt to whatever procs you might have, but always fitting that Frostbolt. Those Frostbolts combined with a Frozen Orb means you might get an overload of Fingers of Frost procs, so if you see that you're having trouble getting rid of those same procs and you're just staying at the 3 stacks and you keep casting Frostbolts and you're just staying there, you can just send one solo just to clean them out a bit, okay? But pretty much just repeat the same rotation and rules as I said before. Your Icy Veins is just going to be there increasing your haste, so you're going to cast faster and allowing you to do more Frostbolts, so more procs, and reducing your global cooldowns as well, so you can do your rotation more nicely. Now, due to Thermal Void, each Ice Lance is going to increase its duration by 1 second, so it's just about keeping a perfect use of your procs to maximize your Icy Veins duration with a Thermal Void and make it last for as long as you can. Once all of that goes down, keep a normal rotation just as before. Afterwards, Ebon Bolt. Just use on cooldown alright, as fast as you can, even if you have a Brain Freeze proc active. Remember that travel time and proc generation thing, so you can do a Ebon Bolt with it active, use that Flurry with it, and still get the next one without overriding. And remember to follow with an Ice Lance afterwards and use that Flurry quick for Ebon Bolt to shatter. Frozen Orb follows the same idea, use it on cooldown. The only time you want to delay it is for a specific moment in a boss fight, where doing so might be DPS increase, like ads will appear or other similar moments. Icy Veins, once again the same idea, you want to try and use a Frozen Orb with it, and you can delay Frozen Orb a bit, just a few seconds, so you can align them, but you're probably never gonna need to do so. They should line up one way or another, if not at the beginning of Icy Veins, sometime after, so don't worry about that too much and use them as they come available or the best moments during the fight. As for Time Warp, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You don't really have control of that in a raid setting, but if used in the beginning, great, and then if you have the Lego Ring, you want to use it again when you have Icy Veins up or get some other Bloodluster to do that for you. As for Blizzard, Frozen Orb will make it instant cast and will reduce the cooldown of the same, but should you use it in single target? The answer is no. You should use that global cooldown either with a proc or a Frostbolt. Only with 2 targets or more it becomes viable to use it so. And that covers it all. As for a movement, you should never have too much trouble with it. You never break your rotation rules because of it. Remember that your Shimmer allows you to cast on the move, so no need to stop casting. As for your procs, you never want to use a Brain Freeze Flurry solo on move, never. And Ice Lance is acceptable if you really must, and if you have more than one proc before you can settle on one place to do your Frostbolt and Ice Lance. But Shimmer should be enough for you to do well. As for multi-target, Not a lot will change really. You want to get Arctic Gale for the damage increase for Blizzard and Splitting Ice for those ice lances. And pretty much that's where most of your damage is gonna come from. You're just gonna keep with a normal rotation, fitting in those blizzards on cooldown, especially while Frozen Orb is up to make them instant cast, and just do as much ice lances as you can. Overall, your rotation priorities stay exactly the same. More targets you get, the faster you get Frozen Orbs due to your blizzard doing damage, meaning more ice lances and more blizzards. All the previous rules will stay, except you might want to skip on some frostbolts if you're in situations like trash packs where you need to burst things down quick and sustainability isn't an issue. Flurries, brain freezes and all of that stays. As for the Glacial Spike build, all will stay really. The changes here are on using those glacial spikes. So what you want to do primarily is to keep track of your icicles, alright? So that mastery that I talked about. Frostbolt generates them, so when you see you're gonna get 5, you want to get that glacial spike button ready to be sent, and you want to try and combo it with a brain freeze flurry because of Winter Chill, making that glacial spike shatter for those pretty nice hits or critical hits. But you should use them as you get available and hope for a proc when you get them. Besides that, all will say, just keep track of your icicles so know when you can use them, so you don't overcap your icicles, and use a brain freeze with it when possible. And that covers it all. Now to talk stats and to wrap up. So your general priority in Frost is going to be on haste, which will equal faster cast times and lower global cooldowns, meaning more procs and faster uses with them. After that, versatility comes close to just increase your overall damage, and as for critical strike, it's also pretty good to you. In my previous guide, I told to rush to a 33% crit, because their shatter will crit 100%. If you below that, there's a small chance that you won't, so your Fingers of Frost ice lances and your Winter Chill ice lances or Frostbolt, whatever you might use, might not crit if you're not at 33%, but it's a very, very small chance. Overall, you want to try and get to those 33% if you can, but don't go out of your way to get it. Focus on haste or on versatility or whatever your priority stat is. So get on raid bots or whatever website you use and start those stat weights. I always say that, I know, but I might make a video about that if you have no idea what I talk about every time I say it. And as for mastery, is generally the worst stat for you since your icicles are not a big thing for you and you no longer have a pet. If with the Glacial Spike build, that will change, mastery will become much more valuable to you as it will increase the icicle damage and in turn glacial spike damage. As for the other stats, the reasoning stays the same. As for legendaries, the Time Warp Ring is amazing for you since, as we said, haste is great for you. After that, either the bracers or head can be great, but nothing with them. Do your normal rotation and they will work. As for multi-targets, the Talent's Ring can be great as you can both be using Splitting Ice and Frozen Touch all in one go. Other Legos aren't all that great for you, so your previous ones pretty much stay here. As for tier 21, nothing will change, will just increase your damage of your abilities like Flurry and your Ice Lances after a flurry, so nothing to worry about. All in all, Frost can be a joy to play when you get procs. When you don't, is the most frustrating specs I've ever played in this goddamn game. One fight you can have amazing DPS and opener, on another with exactly the same conditions, you just don't get procs and your DPS just goes down, down, and down. And there's nothing you can do about that, which is where all the frustration is gonna come from. So if you're watching this and don't main a Frost Mage, beware guys, beware. And as always, thank you for watching, I hope it helps. Subscribe and like for more videos like this. Have a fantastic day everyone, and I'll see you all next time. See ya.